Werewolves of the Medieval Night. Ancient tales of shapeshifters, cursed souls, and the beasts within. Welcome, weary traveler, to dark medieval whispers from the past. You have found your way to a quiet place, a sanctuary from the noise and haste of the modern world. Here, time moves slowly, like candlelight flickering in a drafty hall, like fog rolling through ancient forests, like the patient turning of seasons across centuries long forgotten. Tonight, we delve into one of humanity's oldest fears, the werewolf. These shapeshifters haunted the medieval imagination, creatures of nightmare and legend who walked the boundary between man and beast. The stories you will hear are filled with terror, yes, but also with tragedy, with sorrow, with the quiet desperation of souls trapped between two worlds. This video is called Werewolves of the Medieval Night. Ancient tales of shapeshifters, cursed souls, and the beasts within. Let it carry you gently through the darkness. Whether you are settling into sleep, seeking peaceful relaxation, or driving through the quiet hours of night, allow your mind to drift backward through the centuries. Breathe slowly. Release the tensions of your day. The medieval world awaits you, with all its shadows and whispers, its sorrows, and its strange, terrible beauty. Let us begin. Part 1. The Beast in the Blood. The medieval world was a place of boundaries. Boundaries between kingdoms, between parishes, between the living and the dead, between the saved and the damned. But perhaps no boundary haunted the medieval imagination more deeply than the one separating man from beast. This was not merely a philosophical distinction or a matter of natural history. It was a line drawn by God Himself, a sacred division that defined humanity's place in creation. And yet, whispered the old stories, there were those who crossed that line. There were those who became something other than human, something terrible and hungry, something that hunted beneath the cold light of the moon. The werewolf legends that saturated medieval Europe were not simple monster stories designed to frighten children into obedience, though they certainly accomplished that purpose. They were attempts to explain the inexplicable, to give form to fears that lurked at the edges of understanding. When a shepherd vanished from his flock and was found days later, torn and scattered across the hillside, the medieval mind sought answers. When livestock were slaughtered in the night with a ferocity no ordinary wolf displayed, when travelers disappeared on forest roads never to return, when strange howling echoed from the wilderness during nights of the full moon, people reached for explanations that made sense of a world filled with dangers they could not control. The forests of medieval Europe were vast and dark and largely unmapped. They pressed against every village and town like a living presence, beautiful in their way but deeply threatening. Within those forests lived wolves, real wolves, apex predators whose howls could be heard for miles on quiet winter nights. These animals killed livestock, occasionally attacked humans, and inspired genuine terror in communities that depended on their flocks for survival. But the werewolf was something more than a wolf. The werewolf was the wolf inside, the beast that might dwell within your neighbor, your husband, your father, yourself. In the forests of central France during the late medieval period, tales circulated of the loup-garou, the wolf man who shed his human skin when darkness fell. Peasants spoke of these creatures in hushed voices around evening fires, glancing nervously at shuttered windows, as if the very mention of the word might summon the thing itself. The loup-garou was said to be a person cursed by God for terrible sins, condemned to assume the form of a ravenous wolf and hunt the innocent. Some said the curse descended through bloodlines, passing from parent to child like the taint of original sin itself. Others believed it could be contracted through the bite of another werewolf, spreading like a spiritual plague through communities already devastated by so many other forms of suffering. The transformation itself was described in terms both horrible and pitiful. Medieval accounts spoke of the cursed one feeling the change begin as darkness gathered, a burning sensation spreading through their limbs, their bones cracking and reforming, their skin splitting as coarse fur pushed through from beneath. Their teeth lengthened into fangs, their fingers curved into claws, their spine bent and twisted until they could no longer stand upright. And worst of all, their mind clouded with animal hunger, the human soul retreating into some dark corner while the beast took control. When morning came and they returned to human form, they would remember nothing or remember everything and be unable to stop themselves, which was worse. Consider the tragedy of such an existence. Imagine being a peasant farmer in some small village in the Ardennes, a man who works the fields by day and loves his family, who attends Mass on Sundays and confesses his sins, who dreams of nothing more than a good harvest and healthy children. And then imagine waking one morning in the forest, naked and shivering, your mouth tasting of blood, your hands caked with something dark and terrible. Imagine returning to your village to find a child missing, to see the tracks of a large wolf leading from the village square into the woods from which you just emerged. Imagine the horror of understanding, the weight of guilt for sins you cannot remember committing, the desperate knowledge that when the next full moon rises, it will happen again. This was the werewolf as the medieval imagination conceived it. Not merely a monster to be feared, but a sinner to be pitied, a soul trapped in a curse that represented humanity's deepest anxieties about its own nature. For the medieval mind, shaped by Christian theology, the human being was a creature perpetually at war with itself. The flesh desired one thing, the spirit another. Every person carried within them the potential for beastly behavior, for violence and lust and cruelty. The werewolf simply made this internal struggle external and visible, transforming metaphor into horrifying physical reality. The church struggled with the question of werewolves for centuries. Were they real? Could a human truly transform into a wolf? Learned theologians debated the matter with all the seriousness they brought to questions of doctrine and salvation. Some argued that true physical transformation was impossible, that God would not permit such violations of natural law. The werewolf, they suggested, was an illusion created by the devil, a deception that made the cursed person believe they had become a wolf while their body remained unchanged. Others countered that God's power was unlimited, that he could certainly allow such transformations as punishment for sin, and that the testimony of reliable witnesses should not be dismissed. In Germanic lands, the werewolf tradition took on particular intensity. The word itself, werewolf in Old English and werewolf in later usage, combined the words for man and wolf into a single concept of horrible hybridity. Germanic folklore was rich with stories of warriors who could assume the form of wolves or bears in battle, channeling bestial ferocity to overcome their enemies. These berserkers, as they came to be known, occupied an ambiguous position in the cultural imagination, honored for their effectiveness in war, feared for their uncontrollable violence, suspected of trafficking with dark powers that no Christian should invoke. One tale from the Volsunga saga, preserved in medieval Icelandic manuscripts, tells of Sigmund and his son Sinfjotli, who discover wolfskin cloaks with magical properties. When they don the skins, they are transformed into wolves and cannot return to human form until the appropriate time has passed. In their wolf bodies, they hunt through the forests, killing men and beasts alike, their human judgment overwhelmed by lupin instinct. The story presents transformation as both empowering and imprisoning, granting strength while stripping away the humanity that gives life meaning. When Sigmund finally removes the wolf skin, he burns it so that no one else will suffer the curse it carries. The forests of Scandinavia and the Baltic regions were particularly associated with werewolf legends. These were lands of endless trees and long winter nights, where wolves were numerous and bold, where the thin line between civilization and wilderness could be felt with every howling wind. Finnish and Estonian folklore spoke of wolf charmer clans, families with the hereditary ability to control wolves and, some whispered, to become wolves themselves. These traditions predated Christianity and survived beneath its surface, old beliefs that the new religion could suppress but never entirely eliminate. In the Slavic lands of Eastern Europe, the werewolf concept merged with the vampire tradition to create the Folkedlak, a creature that combined the worst aspects of both. The Folkedlak was said to be a person who had lived sinfully or died unbaptized, cursed to rise from the grave as a wolf-like monster that fed on the living. Some traditions held that every vampire eventually became a Folkedlak, the corruption of the soul manifesting in increasingly bestial form. These creatures haunted the mountain passes and deep forests of the Carpathians, terrorizing isolated villages that had little protection against either supernatural or natural predators. The fear of werewolves was not merely abstract or legendary. It had real consequences in the lives of real people. Throughout the medieval period and into the early modern era, individuals were actually accused, tried, and executed as werewolves. These werewolf trials followed patterns similar to witch trials, often emerging from the same social tensions and employing the same coercive interrogation techniques. When livestock died mysteriously, when children disappeared, when unexplained violence shattered the fragile peace of village life, communities sought someone to blame. And sometimes that someone was accused not merely of evil deeds, but of evil transformation, of becoming something inhuman in service of the devil. The accused were typically marginal figures, outsiders, beggars, the mentally ill, people whose behavior was already considered strange or threatening. Under torture, they confessed to fantastic crimes, describing their transformations in vivid detail, naming accomplices who were then arrested and tortured in turn. The confessions fed into existing folklore, confirming and elaborating the stories that communities already believed. And when the accused were finally executed, burned alive, in many cases, their deaths were seen as proof that the threat had been real and that the community had successfully defended itself against supernatural evil. But step back for a moment and consider what these accusations truly reveal. Behind the werewolf trials were real human beings, people whose strangeness or vulnerability marked them for persecution. The old woman who lived alone at the edge of the village, muttering to herself, gathering herbs in the forest. The young man whose mind had been damaged by fever or trauma, who behaved erratically and frightened his neighbors. The outsider passing through, unknown and therefore unknowable, onto whom any suspicion could be projected. The werewolf accusation was a way of making these marginal figures not merely strange but monstrous, not merely troublesome but genuinely dangerous, deserving of the most extreme punishment society could devise. The medieval werewolf, then, was many things at once. It was a nightmare monster, a creature of darkness and hunger that embodied primal fears about predation and death. It was a theological puzzle, a test case for understanding the nature of sin and transformation and divine punishment. It was a folk tradition, a set of stories passed down through generations, elaborated and adapted to local landscapes and concerns. And it was a social weapon, a category of accusation that could be deployed against anyone whose difference threatened the fragile order of medieval community life. As you listen to these words, perhaps you are growing sleepy. Perhaps the gentle rhythm of the narration is lulling you toward rest, as it is meant to do. Let yourself drift. There is no danger here, no beast lurking in the darkness. The werewolves of medieval legend cannot harm you now. They are shadows of the past, echoes of fears that once seemed so real, so immediate, so terrifying. But in understanding them, we understand something of what it meant to be human in an age when the darkness was vast and close and filled with threats both real and imagined. The medieval peasant, lying in their small cottage as the wind howled outside, hearing the wolves singing in the distant forest, did not have the luxury of skepticism. They lived in a world where the boundaries between the natural and supernatural were permeable, where curses and blessings were as real as the earth beneath their feet. They knew, with a certainty we can barely imagine, that evil was not merely a human choice but a cosmic force, and that this force could manifest in forms both subtle and terrible. The werewolf was one such form, the beast that might wear the face of a neighbor, the predator that might share your blood. Sleep now, or rest, or let your mind wander through these ancient forests. We have only begun our journey through the world of medieval werewolf legend. There is more to tell, more tragedy and terror and strange beauty to explore. But for now, let the images settle into your imagination. The moonlit clearing, the hunched figure neither quite human nor quite wolf, the distant howl that might be animal or might be something else entirely. The medieval night is long and full of whispers. We will continue when you are ready. Part 2. Trials and Terrors. The year is 1573. The place is the village of Dole, in the Franche-Comté region of what is now eastern France. It is autumn, and the grape harvest has been gathered, but there is no celebration in the village. For months, terror has stalked the countryside. Children have disappeared. Bodies have been found in the forests, torn and mutilated, bearing wounds that villagers whisper are not the work of any ordinary wolf. The Parliament of Dole has issued an extraordinary proclamation, authorizing the peasants to hunt not merely wolves but a werewolf, a loup-garou, that is believed to be responsible for the killings. This is not legend. This is history, documented in the official records of the time. The werewolf of Dole would become one of the most famous cases in the long, dark chronicle of lycanthropy trials that swept through Europe during the late medieval and early modern periods. And at the center of this case stood a man named Gilles Garnier, a hermit who lived with his wife in a small cottage at the edge of the forest. A man who, under torture, would confess to crimes almost beyond imagination. Gilles Garnier was what the medieval period would call a marginal figure. He had come to the region from elsewhere, an outsider whose origins were unclear. He had chosen to live apart from the village, in the wild borderland between human settlement and untamed wilderness. His neighbors described him as strange, unsociable, a man who preferred the company of trees to the fellowship of his community. In better times, such eccentricity might have been tolerated, perhaps even romanticized. But these were not better times. Children were dying, and someone had to be responsible. Garnier was arrested after villagers claimed to have seen him in a partially transformed state, attacking a young girl near the forest edge. Under interrogation, he confessed to everything his accusers wanted to hear. He had made a pact with a demon, he said, who had given him an ointment that allowed him to assume the form of a wolf. In this wolf form, he had stalked and killed at least 4 children, eating their flesh while it was still warm. He described the transformations in vivid detail, the sensation of his body changing, the overwhelming hunger that consumed his human reason. He named the locations where his victims could be found, provided details that seemed to confirm his guilt. On January 18, 1574, Gilles Garnier was dragged to the stake and burned alive. His body was reduced to ashes, scattered so that no trace of his corruption would remain to pollute the earth. The village of Dole had faced its monster and destroyed it. Justice had been served, the community had been protected, and the terror was over. But was Gilles Garnier truly a werewolf? Did he actually transform into a wolf and kill children? Or was he a disturbed man, perhaps suffering from mental illness or dementia, who was caught in circumstances he could not control and subjected to tortures that would have extracted confessions from anyone? The historical record cannot tell us what Garnier truly did or believed. What it tells us, with terrible clarity, is what his community believed about him, and what that belief allowed them to do. The Garnier case was far from unique. Throughout the 16th and early 17th centuries, werewolf trials proliferated across France, Germany, Switzerland, and other parts of Europe. The mechanisms of these trials were disturbingly similar to those of witch trials, and indeed the two phenomena were closely related. Both involved accusations of supernatural wrongdoing, pacts with demons, attendance at diabolical gatherings. Both targeted marginal individuals whose strangeness made them convenient scapegoats. Both employed torture to extract confessions and executions to purge the community of perceived evil. In the German lands, the case of Peter Stump achieved particular notoriety. Stump was a farmer from the town of Bedburg, near Cologne, who was accused in 1589 of being a werewolf. The charges against him were extraordinary even by the standards of the time. He was said to have practiced black magic for 25 years, to have received from the devil a magical belt that allowed him to transform into a wolf, to have killed and eaten 14 children and 2 pregnant women. He was also accused of incest with his daughter and various other crimes that seemed designed to establish him as a figure of absolute moral depravity. Under torture, Stump confessed to all of these crimes and more. His confession was published and distributed widely, becoming something of a sensation across Europe. The execution that followed was one of the most gruesome on record. Stump was strapped to a wheel and his flesh torn from his body with red-hot pincers, his arms and legs broken with the blunt side of an axe, his head struck off, and his body burned on a pyre along with the bodies of his daughter and mistress, who were also executed as accomplices. The printed pamphlets that circulated after Stump's death described him as a monstrous figure, barely human even before his supposed transformations. But modern historians have noted troubling elements in the case. Stump was a Protestant in a region where Catholic and Protestant factions were engaged in bitter conflict. His trial occurred during a period of political and religious tension, when accusations of witchcraft and lycanthropy were often deployed as weapons against religious enemies. Some scholars believe Stump was primarily a political target, a Protestant farmer whose destruction served the interests of Catholic authorities seeking to intimidate and eliminate their opponents. Whether Stump was truly guilty of any crime beyond the wrong political affiliation, we cannot know. What we can know is that his trial and execution served multiple purposes for the community that destroyed him. It provided an explanation for unexplained deaths and disappearances. It demonstrated the power of religious and civil authorities to identify and punish evil. It reinforced social boundaries by making an example of someone who had crossed them. And it channeled the fear and anxiety of a traumatized community into ritual violence against a designated enemy. The werewolf trials reveal something profound about medieval and early modern European society. They show us communities under stress, facing threats they could not control: disease, famine, warfare, social upheaval, and reaching for explanations that made sense of their suffering. The werewolf was a figure onto which all manner of fears could be projected. Fear of the wilderness that surrounded every settlement, fear of the stranger and outsider, fear of violence and predation, fear of the bestial impulses that lurked within every human heart. By identifying and destroying werewolves, communities felt they were taking action against forces that otherwise seemed beyond their power to influence. But the trials also reveal the terrible capacity of fear to override reason and compassion. The individuals accused of being werewolves were human beings, most of them almost certainly innocent of the crimes attributed to them. Some may have been mentally ill, exhibiting behaviors their communities interpreted as evidence of transformation. Some may have been eccentric or asocial, living in ways that their neighbors found threatening. Some may have been caught up in political or personal conflicts, targeted by enemies who saw the werewolf accusation as a convenient weapon. And some may simply have been in the wrong place at the wrong time, when fear demanded a scapegoat and their face fit the need. Beyond the formal trials, the fear of werewolves shaped everyday life in countless ways. Parents warned children not to wander in the forest, especially during the full moon. Travelers avoided lonely roads at night. or carried charms and prayers they hoped would protect them. Communities organized watches during periods when attacks were reported, armed men patrolling the boundaries between village and wilderness. The church offered blessings and exorcisms for those who feared they might be cursed or who suspected their neighbors of harboring the beast within. In some regions, specific rituals developed for identifying werewolves. In parts of Prussia and the Baltic, it was believed that werewolves could be recognized by the way they walked, with a slight hunch to their shoulders that betrayed their true nature. In France, examining the body for unusual hair growth or the presence of hair beneath the skin was sometimes employed as a test. If a suspected werewolf was wounded while in wolf form, the wound would supposedly transfer to their human body, so individuals who appeared with unexplained injuries during periods of werewolf activity came under immediate suspicion. These diagnostic methods, of course, were nonsensical, capable of implicating almost anyone whose appearance or circumstances seemed slightly unusual. But they served an important social function. They gave communities a sense of agency, a feeling that they could detect and defend against the threat. They provided frameworks for interpreting events, transforming random misfortune into evidence of supernatural attack. And they reinforced group cohesion by establishing clear criteria for belonging. The person who walked normally, whose skin was smooth, whose injuries were explicable, was demonstrably human. The person who fell short of these criteria might be something else. The medical understanding of the time contributed its own theories about werewolves. Learned physicians discussed a condition they called lycanthropy, a form of madness in which patients believed themselves to be wolves. These individuals, the physicians observed, would howl and growl, refuse cooked food in favor of raw meat, wander in the wilderness at night, and exhibit extreme aggression. The physicians were careful to distinguish this medical condition from actual demonic transformation. Lycanthropy, they argued, was a disease of the mind, perhaps caused by an imbalance of the bodily humors, perhaps by excessive melancholy, perhaps by the influence of the moon on the brain's delicate tissues. This medical perspective offered a more rational explanation for werewolf phenomena, but it did not necessarily translate into more humane treatment for the afflicted. Lycanthropes were still considered dangerous, still subjected to imprisonment and restraint, still viewed with a mixture of fear and disgust. And the medical diagnosis coexisted with the supernatural explanation rather than replacing it. A person might be simultaneously understood as suffering from a mental disease and as being genuinely cursed or demonically possessed. The line between medical condition and diabolical affliction was blurry at best. Consider the experience of someone suffering from what we would now recognize as a severe mental illness, living in a medieval village where the werewolf legends were accepted as fact. Perhaps you have begun to hear voices, to experience impulses you cannot control. Perhaps you have lost time, waking in strange places with no memory of how you arrived. Perhaps, in your confusion and distress, you have come to believe that you are transforming, that the beast the villagers whisper about has taken up residence in your own flesh. You are terrified, not only of what others might do to you, but of what you might do to yourself and others. You seek help from the priest, who speaks of demons and exorcism. You seek help from the physician, who speaks of corrupt humors and prescribes bloodletting. Neither can offer genuine relief. And all the while, your behavior grows more erratic, more frightening, confirming in your neighbor's eyes what they already suspected. The tragedy of the medieval werewolf extends beyond the accused individuals to encompass entire communities caught in cycles of fear and violence. When terror grips a village, when unexplained deaths accumulate and the darkness seems to press closer every night, something happens to the bonds that hold people together. Suspicion replaces trust. Neighbors eye each other warily, wondering what darkness might lurk behind familiar faces. The social fabric frays, and in the unraveling, more violence becomes possible. The execution of a supposed werewolf does not end this cycle. It often intensifies it, demonstrating that the evil was real and might exist elsewhere, that more vigilance and more victims might be required. Let these images sink into your mind as you rest. The torchlit village square where the accused is paraded before jeering crowds. The dark cell where confession is extracted through unspeakable means. The pyre whose flames are meant to purify, but only destroy. These are not scenes of monster hunting, but of human tragedy, of communities turning on their own in desperate attempts to explain and control forces beyond their understanding. The medieval werewolf was real in the sense that mattered most. Real in its consequences for the lives of real people, real in the fear it inspired and the violence it justified. Sleep now, or let your mind drift in contemplation. The trials are over. The fires have burned down to ash. The centuries have passed. We look back from a distance that allows us to see the pattern, to recognize the fear and the tragedy and the terrible waste. But we should not look back with too much complacency. The impulse to find monsters among us, to project our fears onto the vulnerable and different, did not disappear with the last werewolf trial. It merely found new forms, new accusations, new victims. The beast within is never truly vanquished. It only waits for the right conditions to emerge again. Part 3. Redemption and Shadow. In the gray hours before dawn, when the night's deepest darkness begins to thin but the sun has not yet crested the horizon, there exists a moment of profound ambiguity. The medieval mind was acutely aware of such liminal times and spaces, the thresholds where one state of being gives way to another. Dawn and dusk, the edges of the forest, the boundaries between sleep and waking, life and death. These were dangerous places, zones where transformation was possible, where the rules that governed ordinary existence might be suspended or reversed. It is fitting, perhaps, that werewolf legends were so often set in these in-between spaces, for the werewolf itself was a creature of the threshold, neither fully human nor fully beast, trapped in eternal transition. But medieval werewolf lore was not entirely a chronicle of horror and despair. Woven through the terror were threads of something else: redemption, understanding, even a strange kind of hope. For every tale of a ravening beast destroyed by righteous violence, there were other stories, quieter and more complex, that explored the possibility of cure, of return, of the human soul reclaiming what the curse had taken. These stories of werewolf redemption offer a different perspective on the medieval relationship with monstrosity, suggesting that even the most terrible transformation might not be permanent, that even the deepest darkness might give way to light. The medieval church, despite its role in werewolf persecutions, also offered frameworks for understanding and potentially reversing the lycanthropic condition. If werewolves were sinners being punished by God, then repentance and absolution might lift the curse. If they were victims of demonic attack, then exorcism and holy intervention might drive out the evil spirit. Priests and monks debated the theological implications endlessly, and some concluded that werewolves were not beyond salvation, that the human soul, however deeply buried beneath the beast, remained capable of turning back toward God. One remarkable tale from medieval Welsh tradition, preserved in the collection known as the Mabinogion, tells of a nobleman named Llew who is transformed into an eagle after betraying his wife's trust. Though the specific creature differs, the narrative pattern echoes werewolf stories in significant ways. Llew is trapped in animal form, wasting away from wounds that will not heal, until a wise magician discovers his hiding place and coaxes him down from the tree where he has taken refuge. Through magical intervention and patient care, Llew is restored to human form and eventually reclaims his rightful place in society. The transformation, terrible as it was, becomes part of a larger story of loss and recovery, sin and redemption. Similar patterns appear in continental European folklore. The story of Bisclaveret, composed by the Anglo-Norman poet Marie de France in the 12th century, presents a nobleman who must transform into a wolf for 3 days every week. When his wife discovers his secret and steals the clothes he needs to regain human form, Bisclaveret is trapped as a wolf indefinitely. But he retains his human intelligence and nobility, eventually winning the favor of the king, who recognizes his gentle and courteous behavior as inconsistent with ordinary wolfishness. When the truth is revealed and his clothes are returned, Bisclaveret transforms back into a man and is restored to his lands and honors. His treacherous wife, meanwhile, is punished with exile, her descendants reportedly bearing the mark of her betrayal in their noseless faces. The tale of Bisclaveret is remarkable for its sympathy toward the werewolf protagonist. Bisclaveret is not presented as evil or cursed for sin, but as a victim of circumstances beyond his control and of his wife's cruel betrayal. His lycanthropy is simply a fact of his existence, an affliction he manages as best he can until betrayal strips away his ability to cope. The story's resolution depends on the king recognizing that appearances can deceive, that the wolf before him possesses a human soul worthy of respect and rescue. It is a tale about seeing past the monstrous exterior to the person within, about the possibility of redemption not through the werewolf's own efforts, but through the compassion and understanding of others. This theme of external rescue appears in many medieval werewolf redemption narratives. The cursed individual, trapped in animal form and unable to break free through their own power, is saved by someone who recognizes their humanity and provides what is needed for return. Sometimes this means returning stolen clothing or artifacts. Sometimes it means performing specific rituals or speaking particular words. Sometimes it simply means treating the wolf person with kindness and patience until the curse runs its natural course. The message embedded in these stories is significant. Transformation need not be permanent, and even those who have become monsters can be brought back through love, faith, and determination. The medieval period also produced stories of voluntary werewolf transformation undertaken for noble purposes. In some Scandinavian sagas, heroes don wolf skins to gain the strength and ferocity needed for battle or to undertake dangerous journeys through wild territory. These transformations are temporary and controlled, tools employed by wise warriors who understand both the power and the danger of the beast within. The ability to become a wolf is presented not as a curse, but as a skill, albeit a dangerous one requiring great discipline to master. These warrior werewolves occupy a different moral position than the cursed or demonic werewolves of other traditions, suggesting that the boundary between man and beast might be crossed intentionally and for good reason. The concept of the werewolf as guardian rather than threat appears in some Eastern European traditions. In certain Slavic folklore, there were believed to be good werewolves who protected their communities against evil spirits, witches, and the restless dead. These benevolent shapeshifters would leave their bodies during sleep, their souls taking wolf form to do battle in the spiritual realm against forces that threatened the living. They were honored rather than feared, their transformations understood as a form of service rather than corruption. This tradition suggests that the medieval imagination was not monolithic in its treatment of werewolves, that different communities developed different frameworks for understanding the phenomenon based on their particular circumstances and beliefs. But perhaps the most profound werewolf redemption stories are those that make no distinction between the beast and the human, that present transformation not as loss of self, but as expansion of it. In these tales, the werewolf eventually integrates both aspects of their nature, becoming neither fully human nor fully wolf, but something that encompasses and transcends both. The curse becomes a blessing in disguise, forcing the transformed individual to confront aspects of themselves they had previously denied or suppressed. The journey through monstrosity becomes a path to wholeness, to a deeper understanding of what it means to be human in a world where the beast is never truly absent. As you drift towards sleep or contemplation, consider what the medieval werewolf ultimately represents. Yes, it is a monster, a figure of fear and violence and loss of control. But it is also a mirror, reflecting back to us our anxieties about our own nature, our own capacity for darkness, our own fear of what we might become under sufficient pressure. The medieval imagination, steeped in Christian theology and classical philosophy, understood human beings as creatures perpetually at war with themselves, torn between higher and lower impulses, between spirit and flesh, between the angel and the beast. The werewolf made this internal conflict visible, externalized it, gave it fur and fangs, and a howl that echoed through the forest night. In this sense, every werewolf story is also a story about being human. The peasant who transforms under the full moon is not simply becoming something other. They are revealing something that was always present, always lurking beneath the surface of civilized behavior. The cure for lycanthropy, in this reading, is not the destruction of the wolf, but its integration. The acceptance that darkness is part of our nature, that the beast within must be acknowledged and channeled rather than denied and suppressed. The medieval werewolf reminds us that we are all, in some sense, shapeshifters, presenting different faces to the world depending on circumstance and need, capable of transformation both terrible and beautiful. The forests that harbored werewolves in medieval legend were also places of sanctuary and revelation. Hermits and holy men retreated to the wilderness to find God, stripping away the distractions of civilization to encounter the divine in solitude and silence. The forest could be dangerous, yes, but it could also be sacred, a place where the boundaries between heaven and earth grew thin. The werewolf, dwelling at the intersection of human settlement and wild nature, occupied a similarly ambiguous position. They were terrifying, but they were also, in their way, holy, marked by transformation, set apart from ordinary existence, living at the edges where the usual rules did not apply. The moon, that silver presence that governs the tides of werewolf transformation, was understood in medieval cosmology as a mediator between earth and heaven, between the mutable world of human affairs and the eternal realm of the divine. Its cycles of waxing and waning mirrored the cycles of earthly life, birth and death, growth and decay, sin and redemption. The werewolf tied to the moon was thus tied to these larger patterns, their transformation a reminder that nothing in this world remains static, that change is the fundamental condition of existence. The same force that turned a man into a wolf would turn the wolf back into a man, given time. The night would give way to day, the full moon would wane to darkness, and then begin its slow return to fullness. All things pass, all things return. In the end, the medieval werewolf offers us a meditation on the nature of transformation itself. We are all, in our own ways, constantly changing, growing older, learning new things, forgetting old ones, becoming different people than we were yesterday, or a year ago, or a decade ago. Sometimes these transformations feel chosen and positive. Sometimes they feel imposed and terrifying. Sometimes we look in the mirror and barely recognize the person looking back, wonder who we have become and how we arrived at this strange place. The werewolf is simply the most dramatic version of this universal experience, transformation compressed into a single night, change made visible and undeniable. The medieval peasant, hearing the wolves howl in the distant forest, might shiver with fear, but also with a kind of recognition. That wildness out, there was also a wildness in here, within the walls of the village, within the walls of every human heart. The boundary between civilization and wilderness was always fragile, always requiring vigilance to maintain. The werewolf was what happened when that boundary failed, when the wild inside broke through and claimed its territory. But the boundary failing was not necessarily the end. It might also be a beginning, a chance to know aspects of oneself that daylight and society kept hidden, a dark gift that could eventually be integrated into a fuller, more complete sense of self. Let these thoughts carry you into rest. The medieval night is fading now, the first gray light of dawn beginning to appear on the eastern horizon. The wolves are returning to their dens, the werewolves to their human forms, the villages to the routines of another day. But something of the night remains, a residue of mystery and transformation that daylight can diminish but never entirely dispel. We carry our own forests within us, our own wolves, our own moons that wax and wane according to rhythms we do not always understand. The medieval werewolf, that figure of terror and tragedy and strange redemption, reminds us that these hidden aspects of ourselves deserve acknowledgement, even compassion, even love. Sleep well, weary traveler. Let the shadows wrap around you like a comfortable cloak, like the darkness of the forest on a moonless night. The werewolves have returned to their human forms, and the dawn is coming, and you are safe here, in this quiet moment between the medieval world and your own. Whatever beasts lurk within you, whatever transformations you fear or desire, they are part of you, part of the complex and beautiful mystery of being human. Rest now, and when you wake, carry something of this journey with you. The awareness that darkness and light are not enemies but partners, that the beast and the human are not opposites but aspects of a single, endlessly transforming whole. And so we reach the end of our journey through the world of medieval werewolves, those terrifying and tragic figures who haunted the forests and villages and nightmares of our ancestors. We have walked through moonlit clearings where transformation waited, stood witness to trials where fear overcame reason, and found glimmers of redemption in stories of return and integration. The medieval night has shared its secrets with us, and we emerge knowing something more about the human capacity for fear, for cruelty, and for hope. Thank you for traveling with me through these shadows. If this journey has brought you peace, if it has helped you relax into sleep or made a long drive more bearable, please consider liking this video and sharing it with others who might find comfort in the darkness. Subscribe to Dark Medieval, Whispers from the Past to join us on future journeys into history's quieter corners, where beauty and sorrow intertwine, where the past speaks to those who are willing to listen. Leave a comment below and tell me which stories move you most, what other topics you would like to explore, what whispers from the past you would like to hear. Your words help shape the path we walk together. Until next time, may your nights be peaceful, may your dreams be gentle, and may you always find your way back from whatever forest you must enter. The medieval world will be here, waiting in the shadows, whenever you wish to return. Farewell for now.